evening and a very warm welcome to The Point. I'm Birgit, and as always it is wonderful to be with you for the program. Well, we're in for something very special on the program tonight, which is a presentation all about a particular insect and a particular bird whose design arguably defies the possibility of evolution. We're going to be hearing all about woodpeckers and the bombardier beetle, and Dr. Richard Kent will be giving us these special presentations. Richard, welcome to The Point.
Oh, it's lovely to be here.
Now, can I start off by asking, Richard, because I know that God's design and creation is something that you're very passionate about, particularly in light of those who are proponents of evolution. Can you tell us why this topic is so important for you?
Well, there are lots and lots of insects, birds, animals, all sorts that defy evolution. These are just two that honestly I defy evolutionists. We're going to talk about woodpeckers that should basically have very bad headaches, bang their head against a tree all day. And we're going to talk about bombardier beetles that should blow themselves up. And how can they possibly evolve? I really, honestly, you can actually go on the internet, go on Google, and watch atheists tie themselves in knots explaining how bombardier beetles evolved in the primordial slime and evolved all these gases that mixed and they didn't blow themselves up. And it's absolute rubbish. It's complete nonsense. Anyway, probably best if we actually look and let the viewers make up their own minds. What do you think?
That sounds wonderful. So we're starting with woodpeckers.
We're starting with woodpeckers.
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you what, if we could actually start, we've got a short 2-minute film, just so that you're familiar with woodpeckers, and you've probably heard them pecking away in the woods. Let's just have a look at a film. It's about 2 minutes long, and I'll start talking after about 30 seconds. Well, there we've got a woodpecker. You're very familiar with woodpeckers pecking away in trees. Now, that particular woodpecker is not in a hurry. But let me tell you that woodpeckers can peck at trees and they can hit that tree at 1,000 times a minute. And they sound like machine guns. You've probably heard them. Brrr, brrr, brrr. Now, the question is, why doesn't Mr. Woodpecker come home and say to Mrs. Woodpecker, my goodness, I've got a headache. I've been bashing my head against a tree all day. And it's a very reasonable question. In fact, it could actually, to be serious, could be much more serious than that, because if you watch that woodpecker, he's really hitting that tree. He's hitting that tree really hard at 1200 G. That's 1200 times the force of gravity. It's really, really hitting that tree hard. And we're going to be talking in a moment, when that film finishes, about how it is that God has designed a woodpecker so he doesn't have a traumatic brain injury every time he starts pecking. By the way, the reason they're bashing away at the tree all day is partly they're making nests for themselves. They're looking for bugs to eat. And sometimes there's a special woodpecker that lives in North America called the acorn woodpecker, and they store acorns in the bark of the wood. Now, we've got some pictures to show you to illustrate the point about woodpeckers. Now, here's a picture of a woodpecker. First of all, they have got very sharp beaks. They're not like hammers, they're like chisels, and they go straight through wood. Wood, pretty tough stuff. But the wood hasn't got a chance against a woodpecker. They peck against that wood and they really make holes in it really quickly. Secondly, there's cartilage, a big block of cartilage to cushion the impact, 1200 G, 1200 times the force of gravity, to protect the skull of the woodpecker against this tremendous force. So maybe if we look at the next picture, I just want to explain that if you or I started doing what a woodpecker does, remember they hit their heads against a tree at 1,200 times the force of gravity. If we only hit our heads very slightly, we're not trying to make a hole in the tree, we're just hitting our head against a tree gently at 100 G, which is quite a hard bang actually, but nothing like a woodpecker. What would 100 G do to us? Well, it would cause a traumatic brain injury and we would die. I'll say it again, at only a mild bang of a human head against a tree, the decelerating forces would impact our brains so badly that we would have a traumatic brain injury which would kill us instantly. So the question is, why doesn't it kill the woodpecker? So we're going to explore this. Maybe we can see another picture. Now, the woodpecker's skull is the strongest and thickest skull in proportion to the woodpecker's weight of all living animals, insects, birds, or any other living organism. It's very, very strong and very, very thick. Designed like a tank, basically. And they have very, very long tongues. I think in the next picture, I can't remember, it might be about a woodpecker's tongue. Yes, the tongue of a woodpecker, now your tongue and my tongue come from our throat, but not with a woodpecker. The woodpecker's tongue starts underneath its throat there, the blue line. This is a particular woodpecker called the European green woodpecker. It starts underneath its throat, it goes right behind its head, it comes through its nostrils and into its beak, and actually it can, when the tongue is extended, comes out 8 inches. Now, how do you evolve that? I mean, how do you evolve that? Now, this woodpecker, as I say, the skull is specially designed so it's very thick and protects the brain of the woodpecker. Our brains, well, all brains are actually, they're made of fatty tissue, but they're very, very fragile. And our brains float around in our skulls in the cerebrospinal fluid. But if we come back to that picture again, it's not the same with a woodpecker. The woodpecker's skull is, if we come back to that last picture again, the woodpecker's skull on the left there is very thick, very compact, and totally surrounds the skull, so there's no facility for the skull to move around. Now I want to concentrate on those eyes next. Just keep looking at the eyes of the woodpecker. The woodpecker can take aim at a piece of wood and bang away at a piece of wood 1,000 times a minute, but every time it actually impacts the wood, it closes its eyes. Why? Because the gravitational forces would cause the eye to actually simply come out of their sockets and literally fly out of the head of the woodpecker. So it shuts its eyes up to 1,000 times a minute as it impacts the wood with machine gun regularity. Now I want to concentrate on the tongue. The tongue, as you can see, is nearly as long as the woodpecker. That particular one is 8 inches long. And I want to tell you at the end of the tongue are barbs which stick into insects. But something else on the end of that tongue is some glue. Now it's like super glue, if you like. It sticks onto the insect, and the insect can wriggle and wriggle and wriggle and wriggle, but it'll never get away because it's stuck with that glue. Now, then the woodpecker, who lives on bugs in wood, in trees, it retracts the tongue with the insect inside it. Next question, when the woodpecker swallows the insect, why doesn't the glue stick to the mouth and the beak of the woodpecker? Answer, because the woodpecker at that point, as soon as the insect comes inside the mouth, develops a solvent for the glue to dissolve the glue. So at this point, the woodpecker then can swallow the bug. So here we have a highly, highly developed skeleton, a highly developed skull, which can withstand the forces of hitting really hard, not with a hammer, but with a chisel, a tree, at 100 times the force of gravity and do it all day long and not kill itself. And also has a tongue which has super glue on it, and also has the solvent in the super glue, so that it can, so that the mouth, the insects, the woodpecker's mouth doesn't get full of glue. It's just amazing. And then this highly developed tongue, which starts under its throat, all the way around the back of its head, and through its nose and into its beak. It's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing. I've talked enough. Birgit, what do you think?
I think it's absolutely fascinating, and it does fill me with awe in God and his design when we reflect on these creatures. And just hearing about how purposeful God's creation of woodpeckers is, and particularly the skull, that it's reinforced in such a way that the impact is actually spread through the skull, and the brain is cushioned in a way that the woodpecker doesn't get headaches or other kind of damage. I mean, it is absolutely fascinating. Did you know something else that I found out about woodpeckers? That apparently the pecking is also a form of elaborate communication, because woodpeckers don't have any vocal song. I mean, they can chirp and chatter, but actually when they want to communicate, they'll actually peck on something that's hollow. So a hollow trunk, for example, it's a way of communicating, as we're seeing. Well, that doesn't look so hollow, but actually that's another point about woodpeckers. Apparently the most common plumage colours are black, white and red and yellow. So there we go.
Well, there we go. Isn't that fantastic?
Yes.
And did you have any scripts, or are you going to save them for later?
Oh, maybe later, yeah.
Maybe later. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll now talk about the second unbelievable character, which unbelievable living being, that living organism that defies evolution, and that is the bombardier beetle. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard. Let's look at this short clip, just 2 minutes long, of a bombardier beetle. Well, there we are, the bombardier beetle. Let me tell you about the bombardier beetle. They're about 1/2 inch long. They're little, tiny little things. And they've got lots and lots of predators. All beetles have. Lots and lots of predators. Birds love beetles. Frogs like beetles. Spiders like beetles. Almost everything likes beetles. But this particular little beetle isn't frightened of birds or spiders or frogs or anything. It's got a machine gun. It's got a machine gun. Basically, it's got something at the back of its abdomen which moves around a bit like the turret on a tank. It can move around 306 degrees and spray its predators, but only its predators, not its friends. They're friends with ladybirds. They don't spray them, but they're not friends with frogs, so they do spray frogs. with this noxious chemical at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. That's twice as hot as a boiling kettle. Really, really hot. And it's like being sprayed with tear gas. Really caustic, it burns. And the question is, how did this happen? Of course, the evolutionists say, well, it evolved in the primordial slime and it just tried a little bit of explosive mixture. Guess what it would have happened if an insect tried to evolve an explosive device in its abdomen like that? I'll tell you what, a big bang. And that's the end of that evolution. That's my opinion. Let me tell you a little bit more. I'd like to, if we could show the second picture now. The explosive device is actually caused by the mixture of two chemicals in its back. The chemicals are hydrogen peroxide, you're probably familiar with that, it's bleach, and hydroquinones. And they are stored separately, but they're put together in the storage tank, as you can see on the bottom left there, the storage tank, but they don't explode because the beetle has put in there an inhibitor which prevents the explosion taking place. Then the storage tank contents is put into the explosion chamber, which must be lined with something not actually asbestos, but something like asbestos, which must have the twin jets at the back. They had twin jets at the back. And then the bombardier beetle adds a catalyst, and what actually happens then is this caustic benzoquinones, which is highly caustic, it burns anything comes into contact, it's very hot, it's very nasty, comes out these twin jets at the back at 212 degrees Fahrenheit out of the back end of the bombardier beetle from this highly developed twin jet which can move around. Now, you probably heard a little pop. It actually isn't a pop, it's sequential. Now, they've done lots of experiments and looked at these things in slow motion. If it was one simple explosive burst, it would be like lighting up the rear burners of a jet engine the rear burners of a jet engine, about 20 of them all together, all at the same time. And basically what would happen is even with all the other things going on, the poor little beetle would explode. So what God has designed in the DNA of the beetle, the bombardier beetle, is for a sequential release of this caustic material. So although we only see a puff, it isn't actually a puff, it's about 100 puffs, 100 little puffs, so that although it appears very quickly, actually as far as the insect itself is concerned, it's only 100 little puffs, all delivered very quickly, so that the insect doesn't blow itself up. Now, honestly, if you look at YouTube, you can see two types. Bombardier beetles, there's a huge amount of material about bombardier beetles. They're probably the most controversial insects discussed by evolutionists and creationists. And honestly, if you want a big laugh, go and listen to what evolutionists say about how bombardiers develop these extraordinary turrets to move around 360 degrees and spray this explosive mixture, and how it all developed by chance in the primordial slime. No, God created this extraordinary animal, complete with everything fully developed. If it didn't have a combustion chamber, which was lined with something similar to asbestos, it would blow itself up. If the two jets weren't already there, it would also blow itself up. If the inhibitor wasn't there, it would blow itself up. If the anti-inhibitor wasn't there, there wouldn't be an explosion. How does it develop the hydrogen peroxide and the quinones in the first place? It's all mind-blowing. And this is a tiny little thing, half an inch long, and this is its only defense. So it must have everything developed right from the very beginning. Otherwise, the birds and the frogs and the spiders are going to eat this beetle. What do you think, Birgit?
I think it's absolutely extraordinary, and when we consider these creatures in light of God's design, it really does fill me with awe in God, that the uniqueness of these creatures and how purposeful their creation is, either for their function, which we see in the woodpecker, or their survival, their defence, as we're seeing with the bombardier beetle. It's incredible, so complex, the design of the bombardier beetle with this chamber and this gas that is actually really dangerous. I mean, not only does it kill predators, but actually there's a burning sensation for humans if it's actually exposed. So it's interesting seeing that graphic of the finger with this gas being released, because there is it can be painful for people too. So
yes, absolutely.
It's really fascinating.
But if you're a frog, I mean, you know what the skin of a frog is like. I mean, they will run away. So will birds and so will spiders. I think you've got some scriptures for us, maybe.
Well, I do. I mean, our topic is looking at these creatures and considering the ways that these arguably defy the possibility of evolution. So you've looked at the science of it, but we can look at this theologically, and the Bible clearly states that God is the creator of all things. And I think as we reflect and read these scriptures, it does fill us with that awe in God. So I'll just read a couple just to encourage us as the program ends. So the first verse is from Isaiah 44, verse 24, and it says, "Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, and the one who formed you from the womb. I, the Lord, am the maker of all things." So there's God saying, I, the Lord, am the maker of all things. So one clear statement of God as creator. Colossians in the New Testament, Colossians 1:16 says, "For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on the earth, visible and invisible." Again, clearly defining that God is the designer and creator of creation, of nature, of these examples that we've just been considering tonight. And if we turn to Genesis, specifically the woodpeckers, the birds, and specifically the insects, the bombardier beetles, just to read these two verses, on the fifth day of creation, Genesis 1, verses 24 to 25, God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." So that was the fifth day of creation, God clearly creating all bird species, including the woodpecker. And then for the insects, on the sixth day of creation, Genesis 1, verses 20, I think it's 26 actually, it says, "Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, and beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good."
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
Well, you've probably heard me say that everything is supernatural. Everything is supernatural. There is a place up in London called the Natural History Museum. Either they should rename it the Supernatural History Museum, or they should pull it down, one or the other, because everything is created by God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And as Birgit just read, God created on the 6 days of creation all the various, everything living, and also all the space, all the time, all of matter, all of energy, all the sun, the moon, the stars, and the light, and everything else. But God created them. So wherever you look, whether you're looking out of the window at the beautiful plants that do photosynthesis, whether you're looking at the human body, which is totally supernatural, whether you're looking at how birds fly, which is amazing, whether you watch how the fish swim with their swim bladders, and we haven't covered that yet. Wherever you look, it's all made by God, and it's all supernatural. Everything is totally mind-blowing, Birgit.
Oh, it's really fascinating. I love these studies this research that you do, and the way that as we learn about these creatures and their complexity, their uniqueness, their design, how ultimately it points us back to their creator and fills us with awe. What an imagination God has.
Yes.
It's incredible that he willed these creatures and created them, and we can appreciate them and enjoy them in this way. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. Is there a closing scripture or thought that you'd like to leave us with?
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, in the original Hebrew, there are 7 letters there. 7 letters, and the actual nouns are God, heaven and earth, and if you add up the numeric, it comes to 777, which actually speaks of the Trinity. Father, Son and Holy Spirit who created everything.
Richard, thank you so much for all that you've shared on the design of the woodpecker, the design of the bombardier beetle, and how the complexity of this design arguably defies the possibility of evolution. It's been so interesting, informative, fascinating. Thank you so much. We hope the program's been encouraging. We look forward to being with you next week, and in the meantime, may God bless you. Bye-bye.